What if a bridge meant to connect two nations suddenly became a symbol of division and defiance?
On September 19, 2025, a historic and chilling moment unfolded on a 162-meter border bridge linking Narva in Estonia and Ivangorod in Russia. This was no ordinary closure.
The Estonian government decided to shut the gates indefinitely, transforming a once peaceful crossing into an unyielding barrier, one that would remain closed as long as the war in Ukraine raged on.
The catalyst was as sharp and loud as a storm breaking in the Baltic skies that very day. 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets boldly breached NATO and Estonian airspace, ignoring every warning blaring from radar stations.
This was no accidental detour. It was a calculated provocation, a blatant message from Moscow: I can appear at your doorstep whenever I wish. Estonia's response was immediate, fierce, and visible to the world. The Narva Bridge was turned into a fortress overnight. Massive steel gates, retractable and unyielding, slammed down across the vehicle lanes. Concrete barriers, jagged like giant dragon's teeth, rose up amid the clamor of heavy machinery.
Barbed wire and metal shields spread across the Estonian side, while new watchtowers pierced the skyline, manned by armed guards whose faces betrayed no fear, only grim resolve. This was more than geopolitics. For thousands living here, it was a rupture of daily life and shattered hopes.
On the Russian side in Ivangorod, chaos erupted as hundreds scrambled to cross. These were ordinary citizens, workers commuting to jobs in Estonia, families visiting elderly relatives, merchants depending on cross-border trade for decades.
Now, they were stopped cold by steel gates and silent soldiers. Families divided by a river, separated not by distance but by a relentless political storm. The Narva Bridge, once a symbol of friendship, had become a monument to broken dreams and frayed human bonds.
The Tallinn government's firm declaration that this closure would last until peace prevailed in Ukraine left no illusions.
This was not a temporary reaction, it heralded a harsh new reality on the Baltic frontier. Meanwhile, the crackdown extended beyond Narva. Along Estonia's southern borders at Sigula and Lahama, retractable steel walls and concrete blocks were fortified, ready to snap shut in seconds if crisis struck. Estonia was preparing not for a moment, but for a prolonged struggle, a shield against Russia's attempts to destabilize the region through irregular migrant flows or sudden aggression.
Estonia's resolve stems from deep scars left by history. Though small in size, the nation knows its independence is fragile, hard-earned, and endlessly precarious.
The defense doctrine here is one of deterrence through denial, making any invasion so steep in cost and blood that it becomes impossible to imagine. This strategy combines modern sensors hidden among dense forests, local militias familiar with every curve of the land, and a constant presence of Allied forces standing watch. To Moscow, this may look like a tiny country defying a giant adversary. But to Tallinn, it's a statement carved in steel and stone: no invasion will be easy. The Narva Bridge closure is the loudest warning yet that this is not a game or a gesture, but a line drawn in concrete. Far from just Estonia's fight, this act rippled across the Baltic nations.
Latvia and Lithuania, sharing the same painful history and haunting memories, stood immediately united. Borders tightened. Armies grew alert. Physical barriers sprang up like silent sentinels ready to isolate the threat from every direction. This was no longer 3 scattered countries vulnerable separately. Together, they formed a powerful front, a Baltic wall rising from the shadows of their shared past. And behind this wall stood NATO, the unstoppable alliance responding in force. Fighter jets roared into the skies from Amari, Šiauliai, and Lielvard airbases, among others. Squadrons of F-35s, Eurofighter Typhoons, and F-16s patrolled ceaselessly. The message was unmistakable: every inch of this airspace belongs to the alliance now. Any trespass will trigger swift and overwhelming retaliation. On the ground, NATO battle groups were set to the highest alert. This was more than preparation, it was a declaration that the eastern flank would not buckle. The Narva Bridge closure was not just history, it was a turning point. A small nation confronted a giant bully and declared it could no longer cross unchallenged. Determined and resolute, the Baltic states sent a burning signal: their unity had forged an unbreakable shield, backed by the might of the strongest military alliance in modern history. The flames kindled on this bridge will not burn out quietly. They threatened to light up the entire Baltic coast and change the rules of engagement on NATO's most volatile border forever. What happens next will shake Europe's future to its core. The closing of the Narva Bridge sent shockwaves through Russia in the days that followed.
This decision was more than just a political maneuver, it irreversibly altered the lives of countless individuals.
As the announcement echoed through Ivangarad, panic surged among the throngs of people yearning to cross into Estonia.
Families rushed, cars filled with anxious faces, desperately clinging to one last hope.
But what awaited them?
A stark scene, barriers firmly shut, armed soldiers standing resolutely, declaring, "No passage." Among them were Russian workers who ventured daily across this lifeline, children longing to visit grandparents, and merchants who had thrived on the cross-border trade for decades. In a heartbeat, their hopes were dashed, lives upended by the consequences of government actions. An unyielding wall now split them from their families, the river becoming a painful reminder of separation. This once unifying bridge had morphed into a powerful symbol of division, capturing the heartache of broken families and shattered dreams. As the Estonian government made it clear that the bridge would remain closed until the turmoil in Ukraine cooled, a chilling realization dawned: this was not merely a fleeting act of defiance but a harsh new reality. Strikingly, as the events unfolded at Narva, similar fortifications sprang up at Estonia's other southern borders, Sigula and Luama. Retractable steel gates and concrete barriers were swiftly erected, poised for instant closure in the face of crisis. The message was undeniable: Estonia was fortified, ready to confront any attempts at destabilization. Would this bold defense strategy deter further aggression, or would it escalate tensions with the Kremlin? As Estonia enacted its historic border closure, fortifications were swiftly constructed at its southern crossings, Sigula and Luama. Retractable steel gates and concrete barriers were deployed, engineered for rapid deployment in a crisis. This decisive action aimed to thwart any attempts by Russia to ignite instability, especially through irregular migration or surprise military maneuvers, tactics Russia had previously used against Poland and Lithuania. Estonia, albeit small, has learned harsh lessons from its turbulent past. It understands that freedom isn't merely granted, it's a battleground. The haunting memories of Soviet occupation have woven a deep awareness into the very fabric of Estonian identity: any threat from Russia signifies existential peril. Hence, Estonia's defense strategy focuses not on winning outright but on deterring conflict at its roots. This approach, known as deterrence by denial, emphasizes making the cost of aggression so steep for Moscow that it outweighs any possible gains. Fortified steel barriers rise along the border, complemented by high-tech sensors hidden in dense woodlands. Local militias, familiar with every inch of their homeland, stand ready, bolstered by NATO forces stationed across the country. Each measure conveys a clear message: any Russian incursion will lead to a treacherous quagmire. By closing the Narva bridge, Estonia boldly declared its commitment to not only defend its sovereignty but also to safeguard NATO's entire eastern flank. This small nation, staring down an imposing giant, signaled a resounding "enough is enough," resonating powerfully in Moscow, Brussels, Berlin, and Washington. The ripples of Estonia's rebellion on the Narva bridge would soon reach across the entire Baltic coastline, marking the onset of a new, irrevocable chapter on NATO's most sensitive frontier. But as the echoes of this defiance multiplied, would other nations rise in solidarity? Would the flames of unity ignite beneath the iron grasp of an historic adversary? The stage was set, and the world held its breath. Earlier we described how Estonia slammed shut the 162-meter Narva bridge on September 19, 2025, after 3 Russian MiG-31 jets pierced NATO airspace. Steel gates clanged, concrete blocks thundered, and the river hissed beneath a sudden wall of steel. The bridge, once a symbol of friendship, became a stark line of defiance. What price does a continent pay when a single crossing turns into a battlefield? Will the silence of the frozen river mask the roar of looming conflict? Building on that closure, the fire of resistance spread along the entire Baltic coast. Latvia and Lithuania, bound by shared scars of past occupation, answered Estonia's bold move without hesitation. In the span of hours, Latvian officials lifted security at Graniva and Turova to the highest alert, deploying extra troops and fast installing barriers that snapped shut in seconds. Lithuania, guarding the crucial Suwałki corridor wedged between Russia's Kaliningrad exclave and Belarus, poured additional forces into Metninkai and Laverishkes, and intensified joint drills with Poland. The scent of fresh cement mingled with cold sea spray as a tangible Baltic wall began to rise. Can a chain of small nations forge a shield strong enough to halt a giant's advance? Will the coordinated push reshape the region's power balance? The ripple effect reached the heart of the alliance. NATO's air patrols surged, with fighter jets from Germany, the United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, and the United States taking to the skies above the Baltic Sea, their engines humming a warning to any would-be intruder.
Ground forces in Estonia. Latvia and Lithuania entered the highest state of readiness, ready to turn every inch of border into a fortress. The steel gates, the watchtowers, the relentless patrols all send a single message: any step beyond this line will be met with decisive force. Will this united front force the aggressor to rethink its strategy, or will it provoke an even fiercer showdown? The next move could decide the fate of a whole region. In the previous chapter, we saw how Latvia reacted swiftly, reinforcing its borders and teaming up with Lithuania to block any surprise moves by Moscow. Together, these actions began weaving a resilient Baltic shield, a defensive wall no longer fragile but united and vigilant. Now, Russia no longer faces weak, isolated neighbors. Instead, an unbreakable front stretches from Estonia's northern tip all the way down to Lithuania's southern border. This alliance is tightly coordinated, both militarily and politically, moving as one formidable force. The Kremlin's old playbook of divide and conquer is unraveling. Moscow has painfully learned that a threat against one Baltic state instantly triggers a unified response from all three. What once seemed like fragile dominoes ready to topple at any moment now stand resolute, shoulder to shoulder, forming NATO's easternmost fortress. But this Baltic shield isn't just built on history or courage alone. Behind it pulses the iron will and vast strength of NATO, the most powerful military alliance ever assembled. Estonia's daring move at Narva didn't just sound an alarm at NATO headquarters. It fired a starter pistol. When one of NATO's smallest, most vulnerable countries drew a razor-sharp red line, the entire alliance was compelled to back it, and it did so vividly. NATO's reply to the Russian MiG-31 incursion and the closure of the Narva bridge was swift, layered, and strategic. The first move took place above the clouds. For years, the Baltic Air Policing Mission had quietly monitored this critical region. But now, it surged into full throttle. Fresh squadrons of F-35s, Eurofighter Typhoons, and F-16s, flown by pilots from Germany, the United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, and most prominently the United States, were deployed rapidly. 3 key air bases sprang to life: Amari in Estonia, Šiauliai in Lithuania, and Lielvard in Latvia. The skies buzzed with a constant stream of armed patrols circling the Baltic Sea and threading the delicate line along the Russian border. These 24/7 patrols sent a crystal-clear warning across the horizon: this airspace will not be violated again. Any intrusion would meet immediate, overwhelming retaliation. Can you imagine the tension in those skies, the roar of jet engines slicing through cold air, the scent of fuel mixing with the sharp metallic tang of the region's forests beneath? Every pilot knows the stakes. Every radar blip could herald disaster. But now, the Baltic airspace has become a fortress as real and unyielding as the steel gates blocking Narva. What will Moscow's next move be, facing this hardened, unified front both on the ground and in the sky? The Baltic shield has shifted the balance. And the game just changed forever. A significant escalation is unfolding in Europe, revealing glaring tensions between the European Union and Moscow. A pivotal moment occurred on September 19, 2025, when the Estonian government made a decisive move by closing the Narva bridge, which connected Narva in Estonia to Ivangrad in Russia. This bridge, once a symbol of friendship, was locked indefinitely, a fortress against the tumultuous backdrop of ongoing conflict in Ukraine. This decision was prompted by a provocative flight of 3 Russian MiG-31 jets, trespassing into Estonian airspace, defying all warnings from NATO and local radars. As the Estonian government reacted, the Narva bridge transformed overnight. Heavy steel gates and concrete fortifications rose where once there was free passage, echoing construction noises of barriers being erected. What was once a thoroughfare for countless families, workers, and traders turned into a stark reminder of division and strife. On the other side, chaos erupted in Ivangrad as desperate citizens attempted to cross the border, only to be met with the cold steel of closed gates and soldiers denying passage. Hopes of reuniting with loved ones or retaining jobs disappeared into thin air. The implications were profound. This separation not only geographically altered lives but also symbolized a deeper human divide, capturing the essence of broken promises and shattered hopes. The message from Tallinn was crystal clear: the closure would remain until the devastating war in Ukraine reached its conclusion. It represented a resilience that resonated far beyond its borders.
A warning shot across the bow of any would-be aggressor and a stark reflection of the precarious balance in Eastern Europe. Simultaneously, as the shockwaves from this closure rippled outward, neighboring countries took notice. Latvia and Lithuania, deeply intertwined in a shared history of struggle, were not idle observers. Latvia elevated its border security measures, while Lithuania ramped up military readiness, underscoring a unified front among the Baltic states. The narrative shifted from isolated responses to collective action, igniting a powerful alliance determined to stand firm against any threat.
NATO's reaction was immediate and multifaceted.
With once unguarded skies now being patrolled by advanced fighter jets from member nations, a clear message was broadcast to the Kremlin: any violation of this airspace would meet swift, overwhelming force. The air was electric with tension as NATO's enhanced presence sent a warning to Moscow, a formidable deterrent to any miscalculations.
But what was the Kremlin's response to this united show of force? Were they prepared for the ramifications of their provocations? As events escalated, Moscow could no longer afford to treat these nations as divided entities. Instead, it faced a robust defending body, standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to confront any aggression. The dynamics in the Baltic changed irrevocably, solidifying a resistance that would echo through the annals of history. As tensions mount, a question lingers: how far will this conflict escalate before a price is paid?
Previously, we saw how NATO's swift and massive response to the crisis at the Baltic borders sent a clear message: Estonia's courage was backed not just by words, but by thousands of troops and billions in military support across air, land, and sea. This unwavering solidarity left Moscow with very few effective options. But how did this shift shake the Kremlin's strategy? What did Russia plan next when its provocations met such fierce unity? Moscow's bold move to send MiG-31 fighter jets into Estonian airspace was designed to intimidate a smaller neighbor. The Kremlin's hope was to sow confusion within NATO, spark hesitation, and divert Western attention from Ukraine.
But it didn't work.
Instead of division and fear, Russia's gambit triggered unprecedented solidarity among the Baltic states. NATO reinforced its presence with historic speed and scale, something Moscow had not anticipated. Putin's plan backfired in a way that exposed a critical misjudgment. Russian state media exploded with furious propaganda. Hours of television airtime were flooded with narratives painting Estonia as nothing more than a ruthless NATO puppet. They portrayed Estonia as a hostile regime oppressing ethnic Russians and even suggested it was a Nazi state. Footage showed ordinary Russian citizens stranded by the closure of the Narva Bridge. The Kremlin aimed to manufacture sympathy, framing the closure as a humanitarian crisis engineered by Western aggression. Yet the bitter irony did not escape anyone: the crisis had been born from Russia's own dangerous provocations.
Behind the noise of propaganda, Moscow's actual options were painfully limited. Military escalation against Estonia would mean war with NATO itself, something Russia, already depleted and worn down by its grueling conflict in Ukraine, could ill afford. Such a move would be strategic suicide. Economically, Russia had no meaningful leverage over Estonia anymore. European nations had drastically cut dependency on Russian resources, energy blackmail had lost its sting. So what could Moscow do next?
The Kremlin found itself trapped between tactically limited choices and the need to respond.
Would it risk pushing hybrid tactics designed to unsettle the ethnic Russian minority inside Estonia? Could disinformation campaigns and internal unrest become Russia's weapon of choice against a united Baltic front and a reinforced NATO alliance?
The coming months promised a new kind of battle, one fought not only with soldiers and weapons, but with shadows, secrets, and subtle wars behind the headlines. One thing is clear: the seemingly insignificant Narva Bridge closure ignited a chain reaction that erased illusions of weakness along NATO's eastern edge. The Kremlin's miscalculation became a spark that set the Baltic coast ablaze with unity and determination. Yet, beneath the surface, new and unexpected dangers lurked, waiting for the Kremlin's next move. What will unfold next in this tense, high-stakes chess game? Only time will tell. A storm is rising over a 162-meter bridge that once symbolized friendship.
What if a single flight of 3 MiG-31 jets could turn that bridge into a razor-sharp line between peace and war, and force an entire region to choose sides?
Previously, we learned that on September 19, 2025, the Estonian government slammed massive steel gates shut on the Narva crossing, vowing that the span would remain closed until the conflict in Ukraine ends.
The decision followed a daring airspace violation that rattled NATO's nerves and sent shockwaves through the Baltic coast.
The bridge's silence now echoes with the clang of construction, the scent of fresh concrete, and the hard stare of armed guards. Now the story shifts to the fragile trade that once linked Estonia and Russia. With commerce already reduced to a trickle, Moscow's only lever left was hybrid warfare. Could the Kremlin ignite unrest by stoking the ethnic Russian community in Narva? Disinformation flooded social feeds, false rallies were whispered into crowded squares, and agitators claimed they were defending fellow citizens. The air grew heavy with the smell of diesel and fear. Yet Estonian intelligence had anticipated these moves for years, knowing that most locals would not barter their lives for distant ambitions. When the provocation flared, did Russia's gamble collapse into a strategic dead end, leaving its intimidation tactics echoing hollowly across the frozen river? Previously we saw the bridge's steel bars become a stark reminder of a vanished influence. Yet the Baltic neighbors answered the call with synchronized resolve. Latvia tightened its crossings at Greneva and Tarova, piling barbed wire and deploying extra units. Lithuania fortified the Suwalki corridor, positioning troops at Metinkai and Lavariškės, while joint drills with Poland intensified. The region, once a patchwork of isolated states, now stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a living wall of resolve. As the concrete teeth snapped shut, could Moscow sense that its divide-and-conquer script was being rewritten by a united front backed by the world's strongest alliance? Previously the alliance's response had taken to the skies, with EFF-35, EFF-16, and Eurofighter Typhoon jets prowling the Baltic airspace, their engines a constant roar that rattled nearby villages. Ground forces of the enhanced forward presence were placed on the highest alert, turning quiet outposts into humming hubs of readiness. The question lingered, would this show of force deter further aggression, or spur a hidden escalation? The answer arrived with a shiver of steel. In the final breath, an unexpected twist unfurled. As the gates remained sealed, a convoy of civilian engineers from both sides arrived under a white flag, carrying tools, not weapons. They began laying a new, low-profile fiber line beneath the river, whispering promises of future reconnection. While the steel curtain still loomed above, the hum of buried cables suggested a different kind of bridge, one forged not of stone but of shared necessity. Could this quiet, underground pact become the true catalyst for peace? Or merely a fragile thread awaiting the next storm? The echo of that question lingers, waiting for the next sunrise over the Baltic waters. A storm looms ominously over a 162-meter bridge that once embodied friendship. What if 3 MiG-31 jets could transform this bridge into a razor-sharp division between peace and conflict, forcing an entire region to take sides? Just days ago, on September 19, 2025, the Estonian government decisively slammed metal gates shut on the Narva crossing, declaring it would remain sealed until the war in Ukraine concludes. This bold act followed a reckless airspace incursion that rattled NATO's resolve and sent shockwaves along the Baltic coast. The previously vibrant bridge now echoed with the clang of construction, the tang of fresh concrete in the air, and the intimidating presence of armed guards. As we delve deeper, we witness the delicate trade that once thrived between Estonia and Russia teetering on the brink. With commerce dwindling to a frail trickle, Moscow's final recourse appeared to be hybrid warfare. Could the Kremlin spark unrest by fueling tensions within the ethnic Russian population in Narva? Waves of disinformation cascaded through social media, false rallies murmured through crowded squares, and provocateurs insisted they were safeguarding fellow communities. The atmosphere thickened with the acrid smell of diesel fuel and the palpable tension of fear. Yet, Estonian intelligence had foreseen these maneuvers for years, understanding that the majority of locals had no desire to barter their lives for vague ambitions. When provocation erupted, did Russia's gamble devolve into a strategic deadlock, rendering its intimidation tactics eerily silent against the icy river? The bridge's steel barriers now served as a stark monument to lost influence. Yet, Estonia's Baltic neighbors responded with an unwavering solidarity. Latvia reinforced its borders at Greneva and Tarova with thick barbed wire and additional troops, while Lithuania strengthened the Suwalki corridor, positioning troops at key crossings and ramping up joint military drills with Poland. Once a collection of isolated nations, the region now stood united, forming an impenetrable wall of determination. As the concrete barrier snapped shut, could Moscow sense that its age-old divide-and-conquer strategy was being dismantled by a solidified front, backed by the world's mightiest alliance? The alliance itself took to the skies, deploying EF-35, EF-16, and Eurofighter Typhoon jets to patrol the Baltic airspace, their engines roaring like thunder that reverberated through nearby villages. Ground forces of NATO's enhanced forward presence were placed on the highest alert, transforming quiet installations into bustling hubs of readiness.
The lingering question was clear: would this display of unity deter further aggression, or merely lead to an unforeseen escalation?
As tensions crescendoed, an astonishing twist emerged. On the horizon, a convoy of civilian engineers approached the sealed gates under a white flag, armed not with weapons but with tools for reconstruction. They began laying a discreet fiber optic line beneath the river, whispering promises of potential re-engagement. The image of a steel curtain loomed ominously above. Yet the soft hum of those hidden cables hinted at a gentler kind of connection being forged, not of stone, but of shared necessity.
Was this subtle, underground agreement destined to grow into the true bridge toward peace, or would it become yet another fragile thread awaiting the next storm?
This profound uncertainty leaves a haunting resonance as the dawn approaches over the Baltic waters. In this climate, an unexpected tension rippled through discussions among Russia's high command.
Could they afford to unleash their best troops? Would it lead to their own undoing?
Economic leverage appeared nearly non-existent. Energy blackmail had lost its bite as Europe rapidly distanced itself from Russian gas and oil. In this shifting landscape, the stakes were dangerously high.